Alrighty, lads, here we are. Elder Scrolls series. A setting in a high fantasy universe where multiple races, with an extreme emphasis on the history of their interactions. Throughout the games, there's been just one very common theme, and that's today's topics. Why all the abandoned forts? Like, seriously, why is there so many forts in the world that are just abandoned? There's not an occupant in them. They're just gone for the wilderness to claim them. Now, before we get to the starting topic, there is one game in the series, one, that we need to address. Yes, the dark sheep in the series, Morrowind. Morrowind, the forts are not abandoned, but actively stationed. The reason for this is that the Empire just claimed the land. So they went about imperializing the place as fast as possible. So to start with, they established multiple forts, with many embassies for the locals to reach in contact with the Empire's wide array of resources. This can be church services, this could be charities, this could be even anti-slavery movements. These are all embassies within the forts, so that way the citizens, the Dark Elves, can be exposed to the way of life and the laws of the Empire, and hopefully be converted to their way of thinking. Now, onto the topic. When you play the Elder Scrolls, there is a huge lack in occupied forts throughout the games. They are all abandoned and decayed, subject to occupation by local thugs and wildlife. Now, why is that, you may ask yourself? Why is the military fortifications just abandoned and left to rot in the woods, when throughout the game series it appears that the Empire is on high alert for a multitude of threats that threaten the very foundations of its existence? To answer this question, I believe we should first look at the history of the Elder Scrolls series, starting with Arena, the first game. Now, your first dungeon should be the Fortress of Stone Keep. Now, inside Stone Keep, you'll find that the defenders were overwhelmed by orcs and goblins who now live in the fort as their home. Here we get a glimpse into the purpose of the fort and what it was. It was the personal holding of a noble in Hammerfell. Now, that may seem like an odd statement, that the reason these forts are abandoned is due to them being personal holdings, but we need to consider this. How much wealth would a noble need to maintain such a project? How many soldiers could you hire, and how much time do you wish to spend on scouting for possible threats to your castle? This is a staggering endeavor. So back when the Empire was new, this seemed like a staging ground for many new nobles to establish their own towns, their own settlements, through imperial charters and land grabs. But by doing so, they could elevate their station in the Empire, or even in their own local kingdom politics. But unfortunately, the world is a very, very hostile place. And with roving bands of monsters, with constant skirmishes by local bandits, many nobles would become complacent, even impoverished, from funding and coordinating constant defenses of their forts. This leaves their forts in rather shabby condition. This makes them prone to being overthrown by the local Somali pirates. Something else with personal holdings is that the Empire governs its provinces very loosely. As far as older Elder Scroll games show, most provinces are allowed to engage in whatever they wish. Nords conducting constant raids on High Rock, orcs fighting with the Red Guards. Just about anything goes in the provinces. So with the internal turmoil, we find that some forts also fall victim to disputes between noble families, where one fort is owned by one guy who hates the guts of another guy, owning his own separate fort. We see this a bit touched on in Skyrim, with just one side quest. It's literally just one, where you find this family outside of an abandoned fort, and their enemy is inside, and you must help them destroy their rival enemy. But most of what we see is just journal entries in the game Oblivion, where a lot of ancient forts have letters talking about how X dude has a vendetta and lost to his ex rival. Again, I'm a really big fan of Oblivion. Now, there are more forts than that, though. What of the forts that belong to the Empire's military? Well, here we gain an insight into the military doctrines of the Empire. The Legion of the Empire conducts themselves in a tactical perspective. Now, you may wonder, what exactly do I mean by that? Well, when it comes to the Legion, they do not just set up forts and permanently stay there. No. They stay where it is most advantageous for them. A rather smart idea, as this allows them to cut costs and ease the logistics of where to send troops. Let's look at Skyrim, for example. Skyrim, the Legion had very little presence prior to the war. Why is that? Well, there simply was no point in stationing legions of troops in an area that was already under Imperial control and had very little inclination of being a threat to them. That's the key word, threat. At this point in this time period, the Thalmor was the main threat to the Empire, so the forts on the borders of the Aldmeri Dominion were occupied and not abandoned. But the forts in Skyrim? No real need for them. That was until Ulfric Stormcloak started the Civil War. You see, once the Civil War happens, we see the Empire engage fully in those tactics that I spoke of. They start setting up fortifications in the abandoned forts that hold the most strategic value. In fact, in Skyrim, when you play the Civil War sideline, you take over most, if not all, the holds by just owning the forts. Only sieging of the cities that occur in the game is Whiterun, and then either Solitude or Windhelm, depending on which side you were. And this is due to the fact that the strategic value of the forts cuts off enemy supply lines and forces them to withdraw or starve. This plays very well in the Legion's favor, as they have supply lines from outside the province. But for the Stormcloaks, food is very hard to come by. It's hard enough because Skyrim farming is just difficult in that tundra wasteland. So to be cut off would devastate their forces. So by tactically occupying old forts, they effectively won the war. This leads back to the beginning when I said Morrowind was different. I said it was due to the fact the Empire was trying to imperialize the place, as it was freshly conquered. I truly think that the forts there will be abandoned once the Dark Elves show a keen commitment to the Empire way of life. But, well, we don't really get that because of unfortunate circumstances that happen that causes the Dark Elves to suffer quite tremendously. Now this leads to other games like Oblivion. Why the forts are not occupied despite an invasion from the very realms of the Daedra. The Legion, as I said, occupied based on a tactical lens of warfare. It would make no tactical sense for the Legion to occupy all the forts in the world, whereas if they just fortified the cities and maintained the roads clear of threats, they could facilitate a much stronger defense against the apocalypse. A phrase from the Book of War by Sun Tzu: "He who defends everything loses everything." This is the strategic tactical lens that I see the Legion in. They don't defend everything because this would put a huge strain on their resources, a huge strain on their logistics. But if they just defend one or two areas, you'll have a very, very good, strong defense in those two areas. Now, many of these forts are abandoned in Oblivion due to loss of strategic value, and that is the cusp of the video. Aside from the personal holdings in the forts, majority are militarily. They have been just simply forgotten due to the loss of the strategic value in their position, and this can be due to things like the war being over, the threat was eliminated, or even the fact that the fort doesn't protect anything, as the enemy could have found a different place of attack. These forts, in my mind, are like sleeping beasts. They slumber, and some are destined to never awaken again. But some are sleeping beasts just waiting for the right time, the right war, where they can be woken up to be the pivotal site of yet another battle, protecting its occupants and repelling the attackers. This has been Fraser 700. It's fun talking about weird topics like the abandoned forts. I hope you guys enjoy, and if you guys disagree with me, always comment down below and tell me why I'm wrong. But besides that, tell me down below what you guys would like to see next. And as always, see you lads next time. Peace.